My name's Terry Duffy and I work for Acas, and I work in the advice and business solutions side of Acas, and that's the part of our business that actually tries to give people the tools and the ways of distilled knowledge about what we've learned about conflict in the workplace and what works in terms of managing it effectively. I've worked for Acas for over 20 years now in a variety of jobs. I've worked on the dispute resolution side of things when things have gone wrong. And trying to repair those things is incredibly difficult. And sometimes when things have gone to tribunal, there is no repair to be done to relationships. It's just a matter of finding a way for the parties to separate as amicably as they can. And it's much nicer for me to be working in the preventative side of things. Richard, would you like to just give a little introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Terry, and good morning, everybody. So my name's Richard Saundry. I work at the University of Westminster, currently working on the Skill Managers project, which we'll talk a little bit about the course we've developed as a result of that a little bit later in the webinar. I've been working on managing conflicts at work, researching, advising, working closely with people like Terry and Acas for about the last 20 years. And so hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit of what I've learned in that time, and also which will highlight some of the issues that we deal with in the Skill Managers course, which we'll get to later on.
Lovely, thank you so much, Richard. We've got an hour together, so we're going to make some progress. And I think, Richard, if you wouldn't mind, would you start us off before we get into perhaps the top tips and how we should look at managing conflict effectively in the workplace? Would you perhaps talk to us about maybe the background about why this is so important?
Yeah, I mean, in my view, Terry, and everybody listening, I mean, I think the line managers play an absolutely key role in not just managing conflict, but also managing their staff so that conflict doesn't occur. So preventing conflict, as well as you mentioned, Terry, creating good relationships at work. The line manager, all our research shows that line managers shape experiences at work. They're the most important people. They're the people who people will go to. They've got a problem. They're most likely to go to their line manager. But line management, if it's done badly, is also more likely to cause a particular problem as well. And we know also that in the UK, 1/3 of workers experience conflict at work every year. Okay, so it's a significant number. So look around you. 1 in 3 of your colleagues are going to be experiencing conflict as we speak. 4 in 10 workers who experience conflict report reduced motivation as a result of that conflict. And crucially, nearly 6 out of 10, so 56%, report stress, anxiety, and depression as a direct result of that conflict. So it has a really big impact on things like well-being and therefore on productivity. And our research has also shown, this is research that I self did with my colleague Peter Irwin at the University of Westminster, in the UK, conflict costs more than £1,000 per worker per year on average. So if you're employing 30 people, you're spending 30 grand a year on conflict. So it's a significant amount of money. I think the last point to make is that, again, what we know from all the data and what we know from all the research is that if conflict can be resolved at an early point, that creates a significant return for the organization. So there's some statistics there, again, from our research. So if conflict is resolved by a manager by having a conversation with somebody, and we're going to be talking a lot about that in the next 45 minutes or so, then that's going to cost perhaps an hour of that management's time, and depending on what the manager earns, that's going to be, and the employee earns, that's going to be somewhere between 75 quid, 200 quid. It's not too much. If that conflict results in absence, on average, that's going to cost the organisation £7,500. If that conflict then escalates to resignation, then on average, that's going to cost the organisation £30,000. So for that hour's conversation that a manager has, as long as it's a good quality conversation with the member of their team, and they can hopefully identify and resolve the issue and work together to resolve the issue, then there's a really significant return. So what we're all about, both in terms of this presentation, the work that Acas and Terry does, and also the course that we've designed, the research we've done that underpins it, is about, can we help managers to give them more confidence, more skills, so that they can have good quality conversations with their teams and that hopefully we can resolve some of those issues at an early point before they really start to do damage to the organisation.
Thanks for that, Richard. That's really helpful. I mean, it strikes me that, can I say, what you were highlighting in there, I mean, there are some very significant numbers that you've, can I say, talked there. And sometimes, yes, we can focus on that business cost, you know, in terms of, can I say, productivity, morale, and, can I say, all of the attritional costs of things not being handled well in workplaces. But I think what you've also highlighted there is that day-to-day experience, our human experience, and the impact that it has. And I think all of those challenges that, can I say, we face in workplaces, we spend, you know, a fair degree of our working, well, of our time, our you know, our life in, can I say, workplaces. And if it's not a healthy, can I say, environment, not only are we not going to be effectively discharging the best of our, can I say, performance, you know, to help the business achieve its goals, we're not going to be well. You know, it's going to be, kind of say, an experience, and that kind of say then leads into, kind of say, how, you know, that work-life balance. You know, you often don't leave things, kind of say, at home, particularly in, kind of say, the different working environments we found ourselves in since the pandemic, where lots of people are actually spending more time working at home, and the intrusion of, can I say, work into the home. So it strikes me there's a human element to this, and a well-being element, as well as, you know, business outputs element too. Okay, so we've got a good scene setting there. Thank you for doing that. What we're going to do now is walk through some of the can I say, top tips that we've learned over many years. And I'm going to start us off by looking at communication. So top tip one for managing conflict at work is to get your communication right. And, you know, as we say here, good communication really is the foundation of dealing with any issue in the workplace. Richard talked about dealing with things early, and I think what he also talked about is dealing with things effectively. So we need to think about what it is that we need to say and how are we going to say it. And I think wherever possible, don't try and hide away from issues. You know, so we talk about openness, we talk about honesty. I think actually calling things out and saying that things aren't as you expect them to be as a manager, and what you do expect, is one of the, kind of say, the things that sometimes people shy away from. Don't be afraid to, kind of say, be calling things out. They need to be called out. Invariably, if we don't address issues, they're not going to go away and resolve themselves. They'll probably only get worse. But good communication does rely on the ability to transact with somebody properly. And there are two levers we have when we're having a good conversation. There are the things that we ask. So are we asking the right kind of questions? But are we also listening to the responses that we're getting? And I think sometimes the listening side of things is one of the things that we need to pay more attention to. So yes, let's ask the questions, let's inquire, let's find out, perhaps is there a root cause to something, but let's listen to what those answers coming back to, because it could be in that we identify what the solutions can be going forward. I think if we do open up a conversation, then we have to follow through and deliver on what we're going to say. You know, there is a balance of things, and we should not try and overcommit just to convince people. I think one of the things that I've learned is that sometimes managers have gone into conversations and come out with more actions on themselves than the individual employee that they were having the conversation with. Now, sometimes it's legitimate that managers need to take things away from a conversation. It may be support, it may be mentoring, it may be training that the line manager can explore for an individual, but we also want to see that ownership and that commitment from the individual as well. So try and find that right balance about who's doing what, for what reason, and when are we going to check that that has been done. And wherever possible, when we're deciding about what can be done, we want to try and achieve that genuine sense that this is a joint endeavour. It's not necessarily a hierarchical, I'll tell you I'll tell you what needs to be done, just go and do it. We want to be supportive as line managers. So if we've identified an issue, and particularly if it is a performance issue, where somebody, it may be struggling with something, we want to be there for them. Now, the reason why I think collaboration is such an effective thing is that if this is done early, the effectiveness that you will see will not just be the resolution of the immediate issue that you are dealing with, but you start to build something with members of your team or that member of your team, and that is a connection. And that is a connection built on trust, where you've worked through something, you've been honest with each other, and you make progress together. And I think what that does, it leads to increased commitment from individuals and a better relationship between the line manager and the individual to have future open and honest conversations as well. So for me, we started with this top tip. It seems sometimes a very broad brush thing to say communication, but it is genuinely the thing that is going to achieve results for us. So think about when we're going to have that communication, what the kinds of barriers to that communication might be. Do I have enough time to do it? Do I have the examples that I can share with individuals? And then am I clear with the individual about what they need to do and what I need to do as a line manager? And hopefully that foundation will lead to, not only success in resolving the immediate issue, but any other issues that might arise in the future. Well, I don't know if you've got any additional thoughts on that, Richard.
I just think it's so important, and it's one of these things that people quite often think is quite straightforward. And I speak to a lot of managers and they say, I'm a great communicator, and they might be great at doing a PowerPoint presentation like this, or they might be good at speaking one way, getting a message across, even sort of really motivating their team. But communication is a two-way process, and particularly when we're talking about identifying potential problems in the workplace and resolving them early, it's about asking questions. And I remember when we were first developing the Skill Managers course, Terry, I spoke to one of your colleagues and said, if you've got one tip to manage, what does it be? And he said, ask questions. And asking those questions is so important because it builds trust. It builds a bit of recognition because the person knows that the manager's interested in their point of view. So it builds that collaboration you were talking about. And it gives the manager a basis to try to resolve something. It's really tempting as managers when we're stressed, we're pressured to impose a situation, to say to somebody how they want it to be. And a manager might need to do that at some point down the line, but to begin with, try and find out what the problem is. And that's by asking questions, having a conversation, being curious, remembering that communication isn't just about delivering a message. It's about actually giving people the opportunity to have their voice by asking questions, and most importantly, listening to the answers, because that's where you'll find the basis for those solutions. So I think it's absolutely crucial. Can I just ask you one quick thing, Terry, before we move on? I think probably a few people out there might be sort of thinking to themselves, that's all very well, but what happens when you want to, you think there might be an issue and you try and have a conversation with somebody and that person just doesn't want to talk to you and they're just reluctant to say anything at all? And I've been in that situation. What advice would you give in terms of dealing with a situation like where someone just is, really stonewalling you when you're pretty sure there's an issue in the background there somewhere?
Yeah, I genuinely think that's not an unusual response. It's almost like a defensive response. People put a barrier, shield around themselves, just to not engage. I think what I would do is just think, well, be a bit kind to yourself as a manager. That you might be interested, you might be asking those questions, but you're not getting something back. I think you can maybe then move the conversation to that. It's almost like,
yeah,
talk about what's happening, that you're not getting anything back from somebody. But I think there's a bit about being consistent and by consistent I mean not just dealing with like not having your favorites and just picking on one person and letting some people get away with it. By consistent I mean that regularity of contact, Richard. It may be that one conversation is not enough, and maybe letting somebody have some time to reflect and maybe setting up a review point. So I've seen it where managers have said, okay, I can understand this might be coming as a surprise, this might be coming as a shock. I'm not hearing any kind of responses from you. Let's leave it for now. But hopefully you are clear about what I'm expecting. But let's come back to it and let's have a conversation. I think there's a good principle, Richard, that I think in life is a good guiding one, which is you give to receive. And I think giving that time and giving that space, but then coming back and having that conversation, maybe reflected that we'd had an earlier conversation, and then maybe we want to pick that up and you genuinely want to hear, is what builds rapport. I don't think you get it sometimes, you can get rapport quickly with some people, other people you have to work. But I think it's that regularity, that interest, that not losing sight of what you want to do. And some things will take longer than others. And I think, but don't give up on it. I think, once you've opened that conversation, don't think just because you've had one conversation, it's resolved. As a manager, I'd be thinking, am I really convinced that that person is clear about, can I say, what I would want to do? Or is there another underlying issue that might still need to be revealed? I'll give them some space, but I will be there for them. I'll be showing that inquiry. And that might mean that the barriers slowly come down, Richard. So again,
Yeah.
some things for managers might be play that longer game. Lovely. Thank you for that. Over to you, Richard. We've got another top tip, which is around productive one-to-ones. All managers have to have one-to-ones.
Yeah.
So what makes them productive?
Right. Okay. So it fits very much with what I've just been saying, because people are more likely to talk to you if you do, as Terry said, if there's some regularity to that, and that helps to build trust. So I think, so some of this is real common sense, but it's easy to forget that in the pressured environment that we all work in. So have one-to-ones first off. Second, make them regular. Try to allocate specific times, no interruptions. It's very crucial. I speak to a lot of employees who will say, well, I've talked to my manager, but my manager's not listening to me because he's got his phone on, or she's got a laptop on the desk, she's reading her emails. So it's about making sure that the person opposite, even if it's just 10 minutes, for those 10 minutes, they have your undivided attention. And it's absolutely crucial. It's very easy. And I know I've been guilty of this when I've been managing people in the past. Very easy to just let that slip, or however we might know it. I think also it's about recognizing positive performance and positive behaviors, but not shying away from negatives. I think we'll get on to talking about difficult issues and having difficult conversations in a couple of moments. If you can, one-to-ones are a great place where you can start to raise those issues at a really, really early point, to check in on people, check they're doing okay, cover some issues that might really be bubbling up under the surface. That avoids the need for that sort of big, difficult conversation later down the line. That's why they're important. I think it's also important to understand there doesn't have to be one set format, and your organization may be very, very different. So, if you're working a small business, those one-to-ones might be quite informal, but sitting down with somebody to have a conversation for 10-15 minutes on a regular basis can make all the difference. They don't have to be necessarily within a formal structure where things are written down, etc. In fact, sometimes it might be better if they're not. So the key thing is about regularity, and using those one-to-ones to really nip issues in the bud, but also to try to build some trust. So I think they're key to that whole communication issue, and to build trust, build good relationships, and that will make it much easier if you do have to raise something that might be construed as being a bit critical or a little bit negative.
Lovely, thank you. So you mentioned there about, I suppose I made the assumption by saying that all managers have one-to-ones, and you quite rightly corrected me that perhaps we don't. What is it you would see? If you don't have one-to-ones as part of your organization at the moment, Richard, how would you look to almost like introduce them in the right way? So that employees and staff were like engaged from the outset in what these things were about?
I think it completely depends on the nature and culture of the organisation. I mean, I do work with one small business, a manufacturing business. I think if you introduced formal one-to-ones overnight, it would be a shock to the system. People would be very suspicious of it. So I think in those sorts of environments, actually just speaking to your manager, saying, make sure you check in with your team maybe once a week, even if it's just for 5–10 minutes, then I think that's fine. That's better than what's happening perhaps previously. And I think one-to-ones regularly just don't happen, or if they do happen, they're real token gestures. I think in a bigger organization where there's a bit more structure perhaps, then you can actually develop something a little bit more sophisticated. Personally, I will always avoid creating too much bureaucracy around it. The crucial thing is the conversation. It's not the record keeping. That can come later if necessary. It's about having the conversation, but having it regularly and using all those communication skills that we were talking about. And I think the third thing is, if you are going to actually introduce a system of one-to-ones, then the focus of introduction, and this needs to be explained to your staff, is about, it's an opportunity for them to communicate to you. It's not just a question of, this isn't somehow, you know, a way of monitoring performance. Obviously, performance might be an issue, but I think the danger is that staff see the introduction of a system of one-to-ones as, okay, well, I'm having my performance appraised or measured or considered on a regular basis. That's not the purpose of these. The purpose of these is a conversation, see how people are getting on, recognize where there's good performance, perhaps see how you can resolve issues where there's perhaps a little bit of a problem, and just to build that trust and to build that ease of communication. And that makes it far more easier if something really serious comes down the line.
Lovely, yeah. And I think that's certainly something I've seen, that organizations have invested heavily in systems, and the system comes first, and then the communication
Absolutely.
both to line managers and to staff, and you get into that horrible um, situation where it's not working for anybody. It's not working for
Yeah.
the business, it's not working for the manager, it's not working for the staff, because it just becomes that exercise that everybody feels they need to do. And I think what you're talking about there is, well, let's define the purpose of these one-to-ones and start with that first, and then think about, can I say, all of the things that might, can I say, sit around it.
If you're working, I don't know, in a bar or a restaurant, or perhaps in a where you're working on the shop floor, then suddenly introducing formal one-to-ones where someone has to go and sit in a manager's office and go through a form, it's just going to be completely countercultural, and managers will hate it, the staff will hate it. So it's about having something that works, that fits that culture, that fits that environment, fits the people, and that it's got to be something that works for the staff. That's the most important thing. It works for the staff, because otherwise you just won't get any buy-in. You won't have decent conversations. The managers won't like it, the staff won't like it, and the whole thing will just fall apart into just disuse over time. And I've seen that time and time again. It's not the structure, it's the quality of the conversation. That's the crucial point, I think, that we need to but that goes on to difficult conversations where perhaps things, you know, are a bit more serious, and that's what I think, Terry, you're going to talk about now.
Yes, I will do, Richard, because obviously we've been talking about maybe the regularity and a pattern of contact that a line manager can establish with members of their team, but there are going to be issues which arise, which will come under this categorization of difficult issues. You know, difficult issues, we've left it as a broad banner under what managers have to deal with. The difficulty of the issue will be, situation dependent. It might be a particular issue which is sensitive, and that people find that difficult to talk about and address, or it might be something which is a difficult issue because of the perceived degree of the severity of the issues, or so something can I say significant has happened. I think the first thing I would say is just to repeat some of the things that we were saying earlier, Richard, that like they're not going to go away, so they've got to be handled. So one of the things we've got to do is, as a line manager, think ahead of potentially what the difficulties might be. You know, so if the difficulties on my side, that I'm a little bit unprepared to want to talk about this issue, then I need to perhaps give myself some time to prepare for that, so that when I do engage in the conversation, I'm a little bit more confident, and then can say can say what I need to in the best possible way. Or are there issues on the employee side? Um, what will it take to enable them to engage in this difficult conversation that we're going to have? So we've set out some of the things that we can clearly control, and I think if we can control as much as we can, then we reduce the potential risks and the difficulty of the situation that we're dealing with. And the first thing I would do is to not underestimate the amount of time that we need to deal with this. We know that managers are under pressure, they're busy, but if we're going to look to tackle a difficult issue, we don't want to run out of time once we begin that conversation. So try and make sure that we've got that privacy and that uninterrupted space, that if we are going to open up a conversation, that we can see it through. I think it's also really, really important that we don't talk in generalized terms to people. We do need to give examples of the areas that are causing us some concern. If we talk in generalities, I think it goes back to that top tip number one, Richard, where that's not good communication. To turn around to somebody and say, well, you know, I've got a problem with your attitude, is not particularly helpful. You're usually just going to get a reaction from that. But if you give specific examples of what you've seen or heard or what have been reported to you, it gives the individual an opportunity to give you a response and to move on in a clearer way. So examples, I think, are absolutely vital. And let's prepare those and let's give those examples for people so that they can engage in the conversation. I think one of the things that we might be dealing with is something which might be out of character as well. So I think that curiosity that a manager might have about, to make sure that we're not just dealing with what's manifested itself or what we've just seen, but trying to make an inquiry about why that might be happening. Now, if we're building like collaboration and connections with our team and having conversations with them is not out of the ordinary, it's far easier to handle these kind of issues because it's not unexpected that you as a manager would be talking to your member of staff. I think when we don't talk to our staff on a regular basis, I think that can set up these conversations to be more difficult than they could be, because actually having that one-to-one conversation is something that we don't ordinarily do. And now we're having it about a particularly sensitive or difficult issue. That almost just compounds the problem. But if we have set something up where we are talking more regularly to our members of our team, we can make reflections on that this is out of character, or this is not what we have ordinarily seen. That might be the thing that undercovers that there's something else which lies behind the behaviour, the issue, or the concern. And again, where do we go from having had this conversation? We need to have a plan for how do we maintain management of it. How do we check in that what we have asked to be done is being done? So setting up and making some plan together about what is going to be done. Now, collaboration is, again, a broad definition here. Being collaborative is about trying to understand what you're going to be doing as part of the post conversation actions, but also what the individual is going to be doing, whether that is that change in behavior or that change in performance, whatever it might be, that they clearly understand it. And the collaborative part of it is, when are we going to come back and check that we've each done what we were going to do? So having that review point, I think, is absolutely essential. And again, for me, it can start to move the difficulty of this conversation, that if we haven't been having regular conversations, we're starting to establish that we do talk and we do address difficult issues, and we do come back and review them, and that then can be kind of the pattern going forward. So hopefully, even out of difficult situations that sometimes land on a manager's door, you can deal with the issue, but you can also start to build that relationship to kind of say manage the situation and the individual going forward. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, the classic muted microphone. Want to just respond to a couple of the questions actually that's come in, Terry, and it's sort of about one-to-ones, but I think it's very relevant here, and that's about formality and recording. And you know, do you have to record things just in case something goes wrong? I don't know what you think about this. For me, I think that if you're having a conversation, and if you're having a difficult conversation with somebody, I think it's great to be prepared, to have some notes there, maybe to have some questions you want to ask if you're nervous about it, to jot some things down. What you don't want to make this conversation like is feel like it's an interrogation. So having somebody to take notes, or you scribbling lots of notes, or wanting to record it, or you just formalize. In my experience anyway, you formalize it, people get very defensive. It may well be that after the meeting, whether it's a one-to-one or whether it's a difficult conversation, you want to then keep a note of that conversation for yourself so that you know exactly what happened. And it may be useful, and I'd get your view on this, Terry, to confirm a few things in writing. Just email, not formally, but you know, if you've agreed on certain actions or certain targets, certain review dates, that's so important, as you were mentioning, that sort of thing. Yeah, a quick email afterwards to confirm that. But you know, this should be a two-way collaborative discussion. It shouldn't feel like this is a disciplinary hearing or this is a formal meeting of some sort. I just get your reaction on that before we move on to the next one, Terry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my experience tells me that sometimes there is confusion around, as soon as something is written down, it creates some formality to it. It doesn't. It's a record, and I think you're right. We do have like tools at our disposal now that are very commonplace, and so electronic email communication between us, a simple email afterwards, just confirming that we've had the discussion and what we were both going to do and when we're going to come back and chat about it, is enhanced communication for me, Richard. It's not formality. It's how you need to go away and you take something, because particularly if it has been a difficult conversation, there will probably be emotion which is going in there. So when we're thinking about, as a manager, how am I clear? How am I satisfied that, having maybe we've had some reactions within that kind of say conversation we've had, Richard, that you're clear about exactly what it is I wanted you to do? Well, I can do that by kind of say, giving you kind of say that follow-up email. It doesn't formalize it. I think the other thing that experience tells me is that sometimes managers feel more protected in the formal procedures because they're laid out about, can I say, what is being done and why it's been done. But my view would always be, do not lose the opportunity to give yourself to deal with it informally, and for the individual to correct it informally. So there is a point at which we would have to make the decision and say, how many conversations have I had with you, Richard, about this particular issue? And how many times have we had a conversation that I'm not seeing any improvement or return? There would be a point at which I would have to turn around and say, we have to move from informal to formal, but don't make that too soon. I think for me, there is far too much where things are escalated too quickly when they could have been dealt with earlier and effectively by some simple things, such as being clearer and recording exactly what we've agreed and keeping an eye on it by having that review point. I think that's the thing for me. Don't let go of it once you've had that difficult conversation and just go, I've had the difficult conversation, job's done there. Come back to it, review it, check in, see whether anything needs to be done. Okay. So again, we're escalating up a little bit here, Richard. So
Yeah.
what about when we're dealing with serious allegations?
And it's relevant to a couple of issues that have come in again in the questions. I think it was Flavia right at the start asked a question about bullying and what should employees do. And clearly we have formal procedures, or organisations should have formal procedures. So they should have a formal grievance procedure, or they might have a dignity at work procedure, so that people can raise concerns if they feel like they're being bullied by their line manager or by another colleague, for example. And those procedures are there, and hopefully are there to protect that individual so they can feel confident that that issue is going to be dealt with. Organisations don't always do that, and that's something that, again, from an organisational point of view, it needs to be really important that where people do raise those issues, that they are acted upon and those procedures are followed. And there's lots of guidance on the Acas website about how to design those processes. I think from our point of view, in terms of how we advise managers, and this is something we stress with the Skilled Managers course, is that formal procedures are really important because they provide consistency, they provide fairness, they provide the ways that employees can raise an issue if they feel like their manager is overstepping the mark, for example, or one of their employees is misbehaving towards them. So they're crucial. However, too often managers can jump into procedure because they're a bit safe, because they're clear, they've got a line to follow. And what we try to encourage managers to do is, while it's important to understand your disciplinary procedure and any appropriate policies, grievance procedures, dignity at work procedures, that before you do that, make sure that it's the right way to go. And sometimes there may be an alternative route which may be able to resolve things without the issues that go along with formal procedures and formal processes. Formal procedure and formal process are there for a reason, but they're not easy. They take time, they're stressed for people, they're difficult for everybody involved, the manager and the employee. And so there's an opportunity to resolve something properly and fairly and transparently without going through that formal procedure. And that needs to be considered at least. And as you say, you can get great advice from Acas in this if you're either an employee or an employer who's heading towards quite a serious issue. And the one thing that I say to people is, do a bit of informal fact finding first. So if you're a manager and an employee comes to you with a concern, have a conversation with them. You don't need to take formal notes. You might want to ask them if it's okay to take a note. Depends on the situation. This isn't something that has to necessarily be recorded, because if it becomes formalized, you're going to do an investigation potentially down the line. So do some informal fact finding, try to get an idea of what's happened, who the people are that are involved, and particularly what people actually want to do. And you need to try to come from an angle of support and understanding rather than blame. So something might have happened which you think, well, that's clearly a disciplinary issue. That's gross misconduct under our policies and procedures. Take a minute, just take a beat to try to understand why something's happened. And there might be all sorts of reasons there. And rather than blaming the individual, just get an idea about perhaps why that has happened. And it may be because of something that's happened outside of work. It may be because they've just worked 16 hours straight. There may be all sorts of different reasons. But before you push that formal button, do that informal fact finding, get an idea of what the reason for that. I come across lots of situations where organizations jump really quickly into formal process. They find it very hard to then pull back. And by the time they get to the end of the formal process, they realize maybe this issue isn't being quite so serious as they thought in the first place. So do that informal fact finding. And if it's a serious issue, there's some initial evidence out there that the organization needs to take some formal action, that's the way it needs to go. But just gather some evidence so you can make a decision. And obviously in this situation, it can be tricky, but maintaining confidentiality where you can is really important. One thing I would say, and this is really important, if somebody comes to you as a manager, or if you're an employee going to your manager with a problem, one of the key things that needs to be resolved right at the beginning in that informal fact-finding stage is, okay, what are you looking for out of this? What do you want to happen? Because that then gives the manager, it gives the organization a clear idea about how this potentially can be resolved. It may not be resolvable. It may be something that has to go through formal process. But those conversations, confidential conversations in the first stage are really, really important. And I think Terry's going to go and talk our sort of, I think it's our last top tips, Terry, is about situations where there's conflicts in the team. And I know a couple of questions have come in relation to that.
I'll mute that. Yes, I'm just going to talk about this because I've just scooting through some of the questions, and a couple of people had put something in about conflict between, I think there was a question about, can I say, two senior leaders within there, but I think the principles are exactly the same. So you've got conflict between two parties. You need to kind of say, think carefully about how you're going to deal with it. So this is not where it's necessarily a line manager who has an issue with the conduct or performance of a member of their team. This is where the workplace is experiencing two people who've got conflict between them. And oftentimes, these are very, very difficult, can I say, situations, because it's not necessarily about rights and wrongs. It's not necessarily about somebody hasn't done something. It's about, can I say, the relationship that might have deteriorated between two parties, which is meaning, for whatever reasons, they're not working effectively or can't work effectively together, and that's causing a business problem. So I think you need to think about how you're going to approach it. So some of the things to do is be strategic in the way that you think about it. And so sometimes bringing in HR to think about, can I say, how this issue can be dealt with. If it might involve senior leaders to sign off any budget that you might have, if you're thinking about bringing in an independent person to come in and perhaps mediate between these two parties. And one of the questions is, does Acas offer mediation? Yes, we do, but so do many other organisations. So if you're looking for an independent mediator, there are lots of, can I say, sources of help or support out there, but they will come at a cost. So you can have that independent person who's going to provide that mediation service, but there's also a way that the situation can be handled internally as well. And that's, for a facilitated conversation to perhaps be handled. And let's imagine we've got a scenario here that the conflict we've got between these two parties is, I'm a line manager and it's two members of my team who have fallen out for reasons that I am not clear about. Well, one of the things we can do is think about trying to get a better understanding of that. And the way that we would do that is have individual meetings with those involved. So I wouldn't bring both of them together immediately. I would want to try and understand what was going on. And I think I'm far in a much better place to do that if I give the privacy and security of having a confidential one-to-one conversation with each of them. That might lead me to understand the situation a bit better, and it might also allow me to make a decision about whether it is appropriate to move to some form of bringing the parties together and getting their buy-in to that. Because I think one of the things that it's important to always recognise, of course we can say to people, you're going to come to a meeting where we're going to discuss this. But if it's not really, if it's more relationship based rather than work related, of course we can give the directions of expectations that you should work together, but we're properly trying to resolve this issue. So I want buy-in. I want them to want to come to this meeting, and I'll probably set up some ground rules and expectations about how we're going to conduct that conversation, and they will be around making sure that we have the opportunity to individually speak and be listened to. And that might mean there might need to be some regulation over not interrupting. And if I'm facilitating that meeting as a third party, I'm going to be the one who has to make sure that happens. But the idea is that when it's a relationship issue, the only people who can really resolve that relationship issue are the two parties themselves. And what I'm trying to do is be the broker, be the kind of facilitator to allow that to happen. And of course, one of the things I can be doing when they are talking to each other is listening to what they're saying and identifying common ground, say things that they might be saying which are the same. They might be talking about their commitment, to the organization. They might be talking about their professionalism. They might be talking about their values. And those things, although they're in conflict with each other at the moment, they might have some shared values and some shared commitments. And highlighting those things can found the foundation of a solution. So I would recommend that you take guidance if you're going to be trying to mediate or facilitate between two parties. But it's an alternative approach, and you don't always have to go external. You can think about, particularly if you have a good relationship with members of your team, and going back to kind of say, like the top tips we've given you all the way along. If having conversations is part of what you do as a line manager, then having this kind of conversation where it's not about their performance or their conduct necessarily, but it's about how they're getting on with somebody else, is going to be a bit easier than if you don't have those conversations.
I think the key thing for me, Terry, that sort of you alluded to there, is about if you've got a conflict between two parties, it's having separate conversations with them. Don't just pull people into a room and try and thrash it out, but also try and identify what are their shared interests. How do they want this to be resolved? Where do they want this to go? Because that's where the solution lies. We all tend to focus on our positions, on whether it's fair, unfair, whether our manager's terrible, whether our colleague is not pulling their weight, whatever it might be. The key thing is, how do they want to resolve this? And so it's finding those common interests that are often is the real nub of trying to resolve some of these issues. Now, hopefully we've got time to answer a few questions. Just before we do that, I think we just want to talk through the training course, which some of this is pulled from, which some of you may be interested in having a look at in some way. So just put the next slide up there, Terry, and then we'll come to some of your questions. So what we've been doing, I've spent the last 5 years developing with colleagues at the University of Westminster and colleagues like Terry at Acas, developing a training intervention. It's called Skill Managers. It's online. It contains a toolkit which managers have access to for 12 months. We've tested this with research, and we found it can have a real impact in organisations in increasing managerial confidence. Somebody in the questions earlier answered about, do you have a template for one-to-ones? There's lots of great advice on the Acas website. Within this particular training package, we have templates for handling difficult conversations, templates for one-to-ones to guide managers through. We have lots of short videos. You can access it on your phone, etc. And the key thing is, it's not just a one-off. So you can actually do the training, which takes 3 or 4 hours, but then there is a toolkit which you have 12 months access to. So if you're a manager or you've got managers, you can dip in and out of it. Whenever you're dealing with an issue, there's advice there to deal with most of the issues that you're going to deal with. So have a look on the Acas website. It's £150 per person. You get 12 months access for that. We think it's a really positive contribution to managing conflict out in the workplace. So have a look at that and see whether that might be something that might help you and your organisations. So I think we do have a few minutes for some of these questions, Terry. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I've been typing a few answers to some of them, Richard, but I don't know if you want to try and pick out a couple that you think we should try and address.
Let me just see. I think there's a question from Catherine Hefford here, which is really interesting, about how do you manage a situation where an employee refuses to accept performance feedback from their manager? So when you have that difficult conversation and the employee either doesn't improve or they just don't accept the fact that there might be a problem, how would you deal with a situation like that? I know that's something that the managers who certainly I've talked to often say, well, fine, I can have these conversations and we can really try and do something positive, but there are some people who just won't respond, or might even respond quite defensively and aggressively. How would you advise a manager in that sort of situation?
Yeah, I think don't lose heart. I think the first thing, because sometimes managers sometimes inheritance situations. There's obviously sometimes legacy issues that they've actually had to come in and deal with, and I think maybe it's a bit of inquiry around that. What has happened in the past? How has can I say messages and performance been managed in the past? Because sometimes people just get into habits. I think if it's clear in that case that it's almost similar to kind of say the question you asked a little bit earlier, Richard, about the person who won't engage, because it is a form of lack of engagement, which might be, well, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I think the manager has to think carefully about how strong does my message need to be. Now, we've talked about informally and hopefully people listening and responding and doing it. And in the main, most people will do that. But if you do have a situation where somebody is not responding, I think what the manager needs to do is begin the escalation to formality without jumping to it. And what I mean by beginning the escalation process is to start saying, if this isn't done, or we don't see a change, then there may be something else we need to do, and then be clear about what that something else is, which is, if I can't get the change through informal conversations with you, then I might need to escalate this to formal procedures where you will get the same message, but there will be a warning associated with it. And then if there's no response to that, then that is what your formal procedures are for, Richard. There is not an option for individuals to veto the requirements of what's in their role, or the reasonable things that the manager is asking by just failing to respond to it. And I think in itself, you might have a secondary issue there that the manager can start to address and say, well, not only do I have an issue about the thing that we're talking about that you're not doing, but I've also got an issue that as your manager, I'm asking you to do something and you're now ignoring that. And that is a secondary issue. So hopefully being open and honest about what is actually happening will lead to the the change in behavior or attitude of the individual. You might just see a small incremental change initially, but if you see a change, seize on it, give some positive feedback on that, and hopefully move it forward in that way.
There's also a few questions in here about, I mean, I've sort of talked about it a bit earlier about recording meetings, recording one-to-one. So there's a question from Ian Locke about where an employee asks for something to be recorded or for notes to be taken in a meeting. How does a manager respond to that? And there's also another question about from one of the delegates about how in her organisation there is a sort of growing requirement to record one-to-ones and even use sort of AI recording methods to record one-to-ones. Personally, I think recording things when it's not necessary in that way makes it more difficult to have an open conversation, is my personal view. Things can be recorded, notes can be kept afterwards. So if you need a note of a particular meeting, my personal view is that recording formal meetings may be necessary if you're going through, obviously, if you're going through an investigation process, you're going through a disciplinary process. If I was to give my advice, I would try to avoid it, because I think it constrains the conversation. If an employee asked for a meeting to be recorded, I think that suggests a bit of a lack of trust. And one might ask, well, why are they asking for it to be recorded? Now, they want to have that conversation with the employee. I'd ask the question, going back to where we came into this, I'd ask the question, well, why do you want it to be, can I just ask you why? And hopefully open up a conversation about perhaps why they don't trust the process. And perhaps if they, to rebuild trust, it might be necessary to say, okay, on this occasion, we'll do it. But I'd ask that question first. Terry, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing on like individuals who are saying, well, I want it recorded. Yes, I think that does tell me something. They might be misunderstanding the environment that we're setting up. So I think let's talk about it. If an individual wants to record it, then yeah, let them record it. I mean, it's their task, to do it. But again, I think the important thing for the manager would be to address what the response to an informal conversation was, which is, I need to have a record of this. I think you're right about the things like with new tools and technologies like AI, and I think they can be helpful in the right settings, but I'm not sure that they're right for informal conversations. The very nature of informal conversations, I think, should be less written things down. It should be just general signals of kind of say what we're discussing and where we need to go. If there is a need for some kind of say detail, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But I think in most situations, it's about checking in with individuals. Are they clear about kind of say what their job role is? Are they clear about kind of say all of the kind of say things that they're expected to do within their role? Are they doing it to the right standards? Is there anything they need to help them get there? These are things which are conversational in nature, and I don't think necessarily need to be recorded. I think you're right. Those tools could be kind of incredibly helpful for things like investigations and things like that, but we're not talking about that on this. We're talking about the issues of a manager, having a proper, effective conversation early with an individual.
Okay. Well, I think we're sort of reaching the end of our time, unfortunately. But there's we could go on for forever, really, talking through some of these things. Quite a lot of the questions that have been asked, for example, around how to deal with emotion, where somebody becomes really emotional, how to deal, what sort of questions managers can ask. We cover a lot of that in the skill manager intervention and the skill managers conflict management skills course we were talking about. So hopefully we've given you a taste of some of our advice that's in there. Do have a look at it, see whether it might work for you. I'm very thanks very much for taking the time out today. Terry, do you want to just say a couple of last words?
Yeah, I would. I mean, the hours flew by. So, I mean, thank you, first of all, to you, Richard. It's always a pleasure to have a, conversation with you about, these topics. And thank you to, the attendees who've put the questions in. Sorry we couldn't get round to all of them. If anybody's interested in looking a little bit more about the skilled managers intervention, there are some links on this slide here, or indeed some of the things that you might want to learn about, more about the research. We'll make sure that links are on this slide as well, and we'll get the slides and we'll try and edit the conversation so it can come out as a recording to those who've attended as well. But thank you for attending. It's been a real whistle stop tour, but I hope you found it useful.
Cheers. Thanks very much.